Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my April wrap-up. As I mentioned in my May TBR, I don't quite have filming brain back yet, so if this is a little scattered or just not very good, then I do deeply apologize, but I need to get these books off of my desk and onto the shelves so that I can regain my workspace, because right now just stacks of books are falling over all over the place. The cats are in grave danger, everything is terrible. So I had a really good reading month in April. I'm finally starting to get back to sort of the levels of reading that I had last year during the pandemic when I was reading 10 to 12 books a month. I read 10 books this month. In previous months this year, I have just not been finishing books. I've been really struggling, and I feel like I'm finally getting some of that reading mojo back. A lot of that is to do with mood reading, so that's why this stack of books is a little bit all over the place. But yeah, without too much preamble, I want to just kind of dive in. So we've got a whole host of books here. A lot of them are fantasy, as per usual, but we have some sci-fi, we have some contemporary set books, which is a little bit unusual, and I have one nonfiction book. So first things first, I have A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. I've been reading this for months. It was meant to be the Space Sirens book for March, and I never got around to finishing it because I have just been struggling so much, but I did finish it. It was the first thing that I finished in April, and I did really enjoy this. To put a very complicated plot very simply, we have a character named Mihit, and she has been appointed to be the ambassador from her small station to the Texkalani Empire, and her predecessor has died. She doesn't really know how or why until she arrives, when she finds out that he has been murdered. So with kind of a ghost of his memory in her head, she has to not only fit in and do her duties and everything like that, but also investigate his murder and try to not also be murdered at the same time. This book is fantastic. It is so worth the hype. I understand why everyone loves this. I do think that I suffered a little bit from doing a lot of stopping and starting with the audiobook, so this is one I would like to reread at some point in the future, because I think that I would connect with it even more, even though I loved it. I thought it was really good. I was sort of I think some bits of it felt very disconnected and sort of disjointed, but that's probably the fact that it took me 3 months to listen to an audiobook. This book is a little bit dense, and I do think that the audiobook is really good to kind of help alleviate some of that. A lot of this centers around linguistics and how sort of poetry and word choices and everything like that can feed into a culture, and it's just so fascinating. It's really good. It's got a great plot, great characters, just the world building is incredible, and yeah, there's a reason that everyone loves this. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I thought it was really excellent. Next up, I veered into YA sci-fi with a book that has been recommended to me by a friend, and I've had sitting on my shelf for about a year. I finally picked it up because the sequel is coming out soon, and I loved this so much. So this is Catfishing on Catnet by Naomi Kritzer. This is a YA contemporary set sci-fi book, and we follow a character named Stephanie, whose mom kind of picks her up and moves her constantly. She's been through 17 schools in the past few years, and her mom says that they are on the run from her father, who's a very bad man. So Stephanie doesn't really have any friends in real life. She sort of makes her connections and has her social life on this website called Catnet. And the kind of currency of Catnet is cat pictures and animal pictures and things like that. So she has this sort of group that she has been sorted into, who she has become really close friends with. On the other side of this, we have Cheshire Cat, who is the AI who runs Catnet, who is incredibly benevolent, very sweet and curious. So when things from Steph's past begin to kind of catch up with her, Cheshire Cat and her friends from online have to kind of step in and help. This is a wonderfully heartwarming book. This was great. It's not quite found family, but it's definitely got that really strong, incredibly sort of fearsome group of friends, and sort of the friendships in this book are wonderful. I love Cheshire Cat as sort of the very just sort of benevolent and curious AI who really likes cat pictures, and it's just it's just so good. This is definitely the perfect palette cleanser if you have been reading a lot of dark stuff like I tend to do. It was just I was totally blown away by this. I would have never picked this up if it weren't for Angela from Literature Science Alliance, who recommended this literally last year, and it's been sat on my shelf and I didn't pick it up until now, and I'm kicking myself because this is like a perfect pandemic read. This is a perfect thing if you just need something really like soft in your life. I also gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought this was so good, and the next book, Chaos on Catnet, just came out, so I'm planning on picking that up soon. The next book that I read is Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. This is her new release that comes out in June. This is a contemporary set fantasy book in which we follow a character named Jess, who is born and raised in the United States, and she's just graduated from Harvard when she finds out that her parents, who have immigrated from Malaysia to the US, are actually going to be moving the family back to Malaysia for her father's job. So it's a really, really interesting combination of this sort of like upheaval and this young woman sort of at this sort of strange point in her life, having just graduated from university, finding herself in a new country where she's kind of familiar with the customs, she kind of knows her family, but she doesn't really fit in. But she's also being haunted by a ghost. This ghost is her grandmother, who was a medium for this god called the Blackwater Sister, and there's a property developer who is threatening to basically bulldoze the land that the Blackwater Sister's shrine is sitting on. So her grandmother wants Jess to basically help sabotage this project and save this land and save this shrine. This book had a lot of ups and downs for me. Overall, I really liked it. I loved the themes of kind of the displacement and just sort of trying to figure out who she is, and being a gay woman in a family where that is just not going to be accepted at all, and kind of trying to hide her sexuality, but also, you know, maintain a long distance relationship with her girlfriend. And I also loved all of the aspects of the folklore with all of the various gods, the ghosts, the rituals. I thought that was so, so incredibly good. But I think especially towards the end, it got a little bit sort of off-kilter for me. There is some content warnings that come with this one. There's a really, really out of left field, very graphic attempted rape in this book, for example, that really just threw me off, didn't feel like it fit. But I did get a very early proof copy of this book from NetGalley, so some of those things may have changed in the time between when I read it and when it comes out. So just my sort of initial thoughts on the version that I read, I liked it, but there were some things that just didn't, they really jarred me about this book. So I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then kind of on a whim, I bought this book that I've been seeing everywhere. I didn't really know anything about it, to the point where apparently I just didn't even know what genre it was, but I ended up loving it. It was so good. So this is House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. This is a book that people have been talking about a lot, partially because it has this incredible cover, but I've been seeing it everywhere and I didn't know anything about it, and it was basically a cover buy for me. This is a YA horror book. I was expecting like contemporary fantasy. No, this is a horror book. And it gave me everything that I wanted from Wilder Girls, but did not get. Wilder Girls was such a huge disappointment. It was just, I didn't think it was very good. And this was everything I wanted that book to be and more. This was fabulous. So in this book we follow 3 sisters, the Hollow sisters, and when they were children they vanished off of the streets of Edinburgh on New Year's Eve, and they returned 1 month later completely unharmed but maybe slightly changed. They all have this sort of matching scar. Their father is claiming that they're not his children, even though they very clearly are, and they had a very, very fraught childhood ever since then. So we follow, I believe it's Ivy is our main character that we follow, her point of view, and Ivy's eldest sister, Gray, disappears at the age of 21. It's been 7 years since they vanished, and she disappears again, and she and her middle sister have to go and find Gray. This book has so many, just the imagery in this book and the way that the author uses kind of like decay and like death and sort of like the crumbling of nature and stuff is so good. It's so, so, so good. it's a visually, in your head, it's a very, very beautiful book. I really enjoyed her writing. I really love the characters. I love their bond as sisters. They're all incredibly different, incredibly complicated and complex women. This book also investigates how female sexuality and sort of just like women's looks and sexuality are turned against them. That's a huge theme of this book, and it's really, really, really well done. But of course, there are some content warnings with this one. I'll list them out in full on Goodreads when I write a review, but we have lots of talk of suicide. We have loads of body horror. If you don't like the idea of, say, ants crawling out of open wounds, this maybe isn't one for you. And we have an on-screen attempted, or on-page attempted sexual assault as well. If those are all things that you think you can kind of like deal with, this is so worth it. Just so good. I really, really love this. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read a book that I was a little bit iffy about picking up, and ultimately I'm glad I did pick it up, but I think that it has there's a line between preachy and sort of like really, really heartfelt, and I think it crossed that line into preachy a little bit for me. I have really, really mixed thoughts on this book. I read it like 3 weeks ago and I'm still pondering it. This is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So just content warnings from the start. This book is basically all about suicide. So we follow a woman named Nora who at, I believe, 35, she's in her 30s, feels like a complete and total failure. She has all of these things that have passed her by. She ran out on her engagement the day or the week before her wedding. She was sort of an Olympic hopeful because she was an amazing swimmer. She's been working in the same kind of like retail job for like 12 years. She just feels like a failure. She was meant to be in this band, and yeah, all of these things have kind of gone wrong in her life, so she decides to take her own life. So in the moment that she overdoses, she sort of enters this place in between life and death, and there's this library called the Midnight Library, and basically she has the choice to redo certain aspects of her life so that she can try to have a better life. So she can choose to stay with the man that she was engaged to and marry him, or she can choose to stick with swimming and become an Olympian. And she kind of lives through all of these various parts of her life and decides whether or not her life is worth living or not. I have some problems with Matt Haig in general. I think he's kind of a pretentious douchebag. And I really don't like some of his takes on mental health, for example, around medication and things like that. But I do like his writing. I think he's a really good writer, and he writes books that I think are really, really helpful to a lot of people, myself included. But this one feels like this one just didn't really click with me personally, I think. And that is 110% a personal thing. I know tons of people who have loved this and it's super meaningful, but I think that it depends on how you choose to read it, sort of what your thoughts on him and kind of his ideas and whatnot are. This is one I feel like a whole group of people can read and everyone can have a completely different reaction to this. I think parts of it really poignant and I really loved certain aspects of it, but I think overall he did a really good job of taking it in a good direction, but I think that ultimately it just didn't really click with me. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars because, again, it's stuff that I really, really liked, but overall, meh. Then I read a translated contemporary, kind of very light sci-fi book. This is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a book that I've heard tons and tons about, very mixed things, and I actually ended up really enjoying this one. So this book takes place in one spot in a cafe where supposedly one of the seats will allow you to travel back in time to a point in the cafe to meet someone who has been in the cafe before, and you have to return before your cup of coffee gets cold. There are a ton of rules that go with this time travel, but those are kind of the big ones. So we follow, it's basically 4 short stories. We follow these people who decide to take them up on this offer and travel back and how that affects them. I thought this was fantastic. I really, really, really loved it. I can see where some of the criticisms come with this book, but for me, I just thought it was fabulous. I loved the whole sort of like the very, very light sci-fi aspects of it. I loved the relationships between the characters, and I just really, really enjoyed like this kind of slice of life book. And apparently there is a second one, which I am absolutely going to be picking up, so I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Network Effect by Martha Wells. This is the 5th Murderbot book and the only full-length novel so far because the rest are novellas. I read this in preparation for Fugitive Telemetry, which is out now in the US, but tragically not in the UK yet, and I'm so sad about that because I really love Murderbot, even though I have some ups and downs with this series. If you haven't read the Murderbot books, basically they are about a construct who is a security unit, a sec unit, made of inorganic and organic parts that's basically, they're an object, a tool that is leased out to people going on expeditions or people who just need security or whatever reason. And they are controlled by this thing called a governor module. If they, you know, act out of line, anything like that, they basically get zapped. So our main character, Murderbot, a name they gave themselves, hacks their governor module before the first book starts, and you kind of follow them around as they're trying to pretend to not be a free-thinking creature, because basically they will be scrapped for parts if that ends up being the case. I really love this series. I love Murderbot as a character. Through the ups and downs of the series for me, Murderbot as a character is what kind of brings me back again and again, because who would have thought that a character named Murderbot would be so incredibly relatable and so incredibly funny, and I love these so much. So this one was interesting because, as I said, it is the first and only full-length novel, at least so far in the series, and while I did really enjoy it, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I think there's a reason that a lot of these books are novellas. It felt like there was a lot of filler here, and while it was really interesting, I really liked the story. I liked everything about it. It just felt like, maybe it's because I'm used to them all being novellas, but it felt like this could have been a lot shorter. So I was happy to have a full-length novel, but do I want more full-length novels? Not necessarily. I just want more Murderbot stories. Then I read one of my most highly anticipated releases of the year, She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is, to put it simply, a reimagining of the founding of the Ming Dynasty in China in, I believe, the 13th century. I have been waiting for this for a very long time. I knew I would love it before I even picked it up, and I did. This was fabulous. I really loved this. This comes out in July, so if you're really hyped up for this book, I think you're really gonna enjoy it. We have several points of view throughout this book, but our main one follows a girl whose family is incredibly, incredibly poor and impoverished, and her father takes her and her brother to basically a fortune teller. The fortune teller says, "You, son, you have a great destiny. You are going to achieve greatness. You're going to be this amazing person. You, daughter, nothing for you." So when bandits attack the village and her father is killed and her brother ends up dying, she decides to take on her brother's identity and seize his destiny for herself. So she becomes Shu, and Shu basically does everything she can to achieve greatness. She has a lot of ambition. I love pretty much everything about this book. There was one downside. I found some of the pacing a little bit slow for some of the other points of view. So we have a bunch of points of view in this book, but there are 2 main ones. We have Shu, and we have a character named Ouyang, who is the eunuch general for the Mongolian princes who are basically controlling this land, ruling everyone. I just wasn't interested in Ouyang or what was going on there and that kind of side of things. I was much more interested in Shu and what she was doing and what was happening over there. But at about halfway through the book, things kind of come together a little bit more for me, and by the time I hit that point where stuff was really getting going on that other side, it was like I just steamrolled through this book, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. If you like morally gray characters with lots and lots of ambition, really complex characters, a fabulous, fabulous military fantasy storyline. If you want kind of mortal enemies sort of fighting from across different sides of the battlefield, you will love this. It is so incredibly good. But I actually think that the best thing about this book is the way that the author talks about gender identity, sexuality, and sort of gender politics, because a lot of this book, characters are either assumed to be male, have taken on a male identity like Shu, or are a woman who is in this group of men. So we have the daughter of a fallen general who is promised in marriage to another man who's in the war camp that Shu ends up joining. And she is brilliant and she is amazing. She's got this amazing head for strategy, but everyone kind of tells her to sit down and shut up because she's a woman. And a lot of Shu's kind of like strategic wins with other characters are due to the fact that she understands women and where women are coming from. And it's just like, it is so good. Articles could be written about the gender politics in this book. It's so fabulous. She does such an incredibly good job with that side of things. And if nothing else in this book interests you, but that sounds interesting, you should absolutely pick this up. Although everything else in this is fabulous too. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought this was so incredibly good. It has a great ending. I cannot wait for the next book. Then I read a nonfiction book. I read one of the sort of classic true crime books, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This is a beautifully, ooh, it's messing up my camera. This is a beautifully written, really, 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 truly fantastic book. Of course, there's a lot of controversy that comes with it, some of that being him befriending one of the two men involved in the murder, because this book is centered on a murder, sort of for the express purpose of like getting the story out of him, but also the fact that there's a lot of dialogue and conversations that there's no way that he could know possibly happened. So this is narrative nonfiction, and I think that sort of knowing that and taking a lot of what is said in this book with a grain of salt is very, very helpful, but it's a stunningly written book. So in 1959, a very wealthy farmer and his family are found having been murdered in their home. There is no sort of motive for this crime. They don't seem to have any enemies. They're sort of beloved members of the community. There's no real reason that anyone can find for this having happened. And everyone in this Kansas town totally freaked out, and it's this huge, huge mystery. So on the one hand, we have sort of the investigation, we get to know the family, we get to know sort of like how the community felt about them, all of that good stuff. And on the other side, we have the two men who committed this murder, and we find out why, who they are, how they came about finding this family, all of that. This is so good. Some of the like, so the descriptions of this town in Kansas with like the heat in the summer, the, you know, just endless fields of wheat. It's just absolutely incredible. Really, really beautifully done. But again, you have to take some of the stuff with a grain of salt because there are like intimate conversations that are had in this book that like he made up. So I would really recommend you pick this up if you're interested in nonfiction in general, but if you are a true crime fan, you should really give this a read. It's excellent, and the audiobook is very, very good. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. This next book is definitely TikTok influenced. I got tired of not understanding like the jokes and the references on TikTok and on Book Talk. So I decided to reread A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is like the perfect pandemic book. It's ridiculous, but it's so fun. I read this in like 2 days and I enjoyed the hell out of it, which I was not really expecting. Do I think it's great? No, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, but I enjoyed it so much more than I did the first time around, I cannot even explain. So if you don't know, this is a YA fantasy book. It's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, in which we have this young woman named Feyre, who is the daughter of a man who has fallen upon very hard times. They were very, very wealthy, and now they are completely impoverished. Her sisters are useless, her father is useless, and the only way the family is surviving is because Feyre hunts. So one day, she shoots a wolf. Wolf turns out to be a fairy. The sort of High Lord comes, breaks down the door, and is like, "Rah, you took a life. I'm gonna take a life. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take you to essentially fairyland where you're gonna live out the rest of your life in peace and not have to worry about your family because they're gonna be incredibly well cared for." And Feyre's like, "Oh no." If I was her, I would be like, sign me up. So that part of the book makes absolutely no sense to me. But when she gets to Prythian, which is the sort of land of the Fae, she finds out that things are not as peaceful as they seem. There's a blight upon the land, and she ends up getting kind of entangled in Fae politics. This was fun. I enjoyed the heck out of this book. I am definitely going to be reading the next one. I have it from the library right now. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It was fun. And last but not least, a book that really doesn't need to exist, but does, is How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories by Holly Black. This is a series of short stories that link into the Folk of the Air series, which starts with The Cruel Prince. I'm very hot and cold on that series. The first book is okay, the second book is amazing, and the third book is a huge disappointment. But I was curious enough to see what she had to say in these stories, and they take place sort of before, during, and after that series. Also, this is freaking out my camera, so sorry about that. The kind of best and most impressive thing about this book is the illustrations. So they're illustrations on, if not every page, then almost every page, and it's a really beautiful book. If you're a huge fan of this series, you should definitely pick this up. Do you need to read it? No. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It's fine. It did nothing to sort of improve my feelings about the series, but I did enjoy reading it, and it was really, really quick. I'm gonna wrap this up now because I have filled up 3 memory cards doing this video. I talk too much, but those are all the books that I read in the month of April. I really feel like I'm starting to get my sort of like reading brain back, and a lot of that was because so many of these books were mood reads. So I would love to hear if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, maybe if they're in your TBR, or what you read in the month of April that you particularly liked, or didn't like if you want to rant. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.